So I think we're all set and ready to start.
Cool.
Kelly, thanks a lot for coming in for this second episode of the Cyclists of Chicago. We'll see. It all depends on how I'm going to kind of organize this once I upload them. But it will be one of the first episodes.
Oh, nice. And a founding episode.
A founding episode, good. Yes, fortunately. We'll see where it goes. I appreciate you taking the time. I think in the spirit of what Cyclists of Chicago is, I met you through cycling, certainly in one of the Divvy events that you put together before you were a part of Divvy. So you are kind of one of those cyclists of Chicago that I've met along the way.
And now I'm returning the favor because, we met by you doing us a favor at Divvy, coming in to chat. So I'm excited to, be on the other side of the table this time.
Yes, and I really appreciate that. So without further ado,
beer. So that's the benefit.
Cheers again. I think without further ado, to everybody out there listening, you are Kelly, and your last name Goldthorpe. Is that how you
Kelly
pronounce
Goldthorpe.
it? Goldthorpe. You work for Divvy, but first and foremost, you are, at least now, a cycling enthusiast. And can you introduce yourself for everybody listening?
So my name's Kelly Goldthorpe. I am Director of Marketing and Rider Experience with Divvy by day. But like you said, I'm a cyclist. I've been riding for about 4 years now. Haven't always been a rider, but went from intimidated about biking to now working with biking, promoting it. So life's a journey, and I'm really excited about where I am now.
Yeah, and it hasn't been that long, has it? Since you arrived, since we met, you hadn't been in Chicago, or was it?
So I've been with Divvy since September, and so we'd met just shortly before there. I was doing some freelance work with them, but I've only been in Chicago about 2.5 years.
Oh, wow.
Previous to that, I was in Madison, Wisconsin for business school.
Oh, okay. So you did, interesting. I didn't know that. An MBA was that?
So I did my MBA up in Madison, and that's where I got into biking. So while getting my MBA, naturally, I decided to try an Ironman. Naturally, those things go hand in hand. I was like, I'm not busy enough. I'll do an Ironman.
Yes, that's two big undertakings right there.
Yeah. Part of an Ironman is 100 miles or more of biking. And so I hadn't really been a biker before that time. That got me into biking. I mean, if you're doing 100-mile rides, you will inevitably enjoy biking.
Or hate it by the end of it, but that's fair enough. So so back then you were doing business school. So before business school, was that a full-time MBA program, or was that a part-time?
It was a full-time MBA program. So went there to think about marketing research, which really fuels what I do today at Divvy. Getting to better understand what people want, what people need, what makes them enjoy experiences. So this is what I focus on during the MBA program.
Prior to that, were you in anything related to marketing or cycling at all?
Nope. I drove a giant hot dog. So right before business school, I drove the Oscar Mayer weinermobile. So I didn't work a ton before business school. Really, it was just 1 year driving a hot dog across America. So making a lot of hot dog jokes. National news, was on the Weather Channel, spent a lot of time in Walmart parking lots, kind of the whole gamut of things. So if you have biking on one end, giant hot dog, that was my first mobility job, if you can say that.
Interesting. So that job, the giant hot dog kind of driver, that's what you were, right?
We like to say hot dogger. That's the official title. But yes, giant hot dog driver is the same.
That entails more than just driving around that truck?
Yeah.
Are you out there and being the face of Oscar Mayer? Is that it?
Yeah, exactly. So there's like one long drive day a week. And I used to prank the new Northwest team when they joined. I was like, oh yeah, the Northwest Divvy, they're really hip. Or the Northwest Weinermobile, they're really hip. They put bikes in the back of the giant hot dog, which the new girl did believe. And she was sorely disappointed when she got to Seattle and there was no bike in the back. But yeah, for that whole year, we would drive around the country. We'd do parades, fairs, festivals, Walmart parking lots. We never handed out hot dogs, but plenty of wiener whistles to go with. So,
but something tells me you enjoyed this. This was maybe a people kind of job.
You will never be more popular than driving a giant hot dog. So I was like, whoa, suddenly I'm the cool kid on the block. Like everybody wants to come talk to me, even though it's 10 o'clock at night and I'm just trying to go to my hotel. But it was just really fun. I mean, it was like a whole job of making people smile and just like wowing them and surprising them. And it was just such a good time. So then when you stop driving the Weinermobile and you're like, I remember I had a rental car, I'm getting gas and I'm like, why isn't anybody talking to me? Like, do you know who I am? Like, why am I so, unpopular now? It was kind of a readjustment period when suddenly you weren't cool anymore.
So now I'm curious. I did an MBA myself, and one of the big things was once you got into the program and you wanted to maybe change careers, it was a big thing to kind of figure out your story of how you will leverage or how some of the skills that you had prior to getting on the MBA are now like translatable into this new kind of role. And I know you do marketing consulting, or at least that's what you did before Divvy. Is there anything particular that you were like, oh, this is a skill I got?
It's a tough story to tell, right? Like, I drove a Giant hot dog for 1 year, and now please let me help you with brand transformation. I remember one interviewer specifically said, how does driving the Weinermobile make you a better market researcher? And what I told him and what I'll tell you is you can talk to anybody. After you drive the Weinermobile for a year, you can literally talk to, relate to, empathize with just about anyone, because you will meet people on the best day of their lives, pulling up in a Ferrari, just living the dream. And then you will meet people who said it was the best thing to happen to them all year on kind of the darkest days of their lives. So it was this and you will meet people of every walk of life, socioeconomic status, literally everything. So in that way, it really did prepare me for marketing and marketing research, because you learn a lot about different people on the road.
So was that something that you stumbled upon, or was it just supposed to be like a temporary job, or you were like...
So it was actually very coveted. I had to sell my dad on that because I postponed grad school, actually. I postponed a full ride to a different grad school to drive the Weinermobile. My dad was furious. He's like, you're going to run a hot dog stand? And I was like, Dad, it's more competitive to get into than Harvard, statistically. So like 1,500 people apply for 12 positions. There's 6 Weinermobiles around the country. And so I was one of the lucky dogs who cut the mustard. And I had heard about it through undergrad. It just always sounded like something fun. Like, do you have an appetite for adventure, a taste for traveling? Are you outgoing and enthusiastic? And yes. Do you love hot dog puns? Definitely. I eat them up. So that's kind of what turned me on to that.
So I think and you saying this now that I've become a father, certainly my daughter's 5 months old, but if I think about it and I'm like, what if she wants to drive the Oscar Mayer mobile, like when she's, I don't know, 22 or whatever? That doesn't sound interesting at first, but it's good to. I think that's one of the interesting things about doing this, right? You get to meet people with different perspectives, and one tends to think that kind of the way you've gone about life is kind of the way that it should be. But then if you look back or you try to explain to somebody how you did things, you're like, I stumbled on a lot of things, and some of them I didn't know I would grow a lot from. But I think so. One thing that we haven't mentioned a lot is actually cycling. So it wasn't such a big part of your life before maybe business school, or even during business school? Was that it?
Yeah, no, I was not a cyclist. I was a runner, marathons. And then I had a bunch of women who had done a triathlon. And I was like, that sounds cool. I'm ready for the next adventure. So my dad assembled a Huffy bicycle from Walmart, which we later discovered he assembled wrong. But I did my first triathlon. It was a sprint triathlon on a Huffy bike. And that was as much fun as the first triathlon can be. You don't know what you're doing. You don't know that it's a Huffy from Walmart. You don't really even understand what that means, and that it's super entry level. So I went from that to then just basically leaping into signing up for Ironman while I was in business school. And so that was, if you've been to Wisconsin, it's like these gorgeous field roads. You're like out in the country. It's amazing. And so that was the type of cycling that I got used to. And I managed to do an entire triathlon training plan, complete a triathlon, an Ironman, and have never bike commuted to school. I never even biked to school. I was so scared, even in Madison, Wisconsin, where you have to look every time you make a turn because there's so many bikers. I was too scared to bike to school. And so it was after the Ironman that I had a friend who said, Kelly, let me show you how to do it. He gave me bike lights for my bike. I didn't even have bike lights at that time. He's like, let's just try it. We'll bike downtown. And then ever since then, his name is Jordan. And I thank him for this job. I thank him all the time. Like, Jordan, thank you for getting me into biking. Because really that changed my life.
So then, and this is interesting to me because very different than how I see biking. I think from my perspective, when I was a kid, I used to, like after school or whatever, just start biking around the neighborhood. Mm-hmm. And even if I got angry with my family or whatever, that's what I would go and mm-hmm. do. And I think till this day, it's kind of that time for me when there's no rules. I can listen to music and mm-hmm. I could just like space out for a bit and just enjoy stuff. So when people ask me about like cycling regimens and like exercise, and I'm like, oh no, like that completely ruins it for mm-hmm. me because it stops being that kind of thing for me. But maybe the way you started approaching it was more of a challenge. Is that it? Because I've realized that people that do marathons, a marathon's a lot about completing it. It's a lot about getting through that, and it's a big undertaking. But I don't think there's people that are that passionate about just stomping the ground for 4 hours or whatever. So was it the challenge originally? It was like, I want to be a person that can actually do this.
I think it was totally that. It was like, I need to prove myself. I'm 22. I need to prove myself. And don't get me wrong, I loved it. And like, I love the marathon community, and same with the cycling community. There's just like awesome people that make it fun to do it. I remember this. When you are competing in a triathlon, they put the age on your calf, and I'm like struggling through the bike. Like I cannot bike, and I certainly wasn't biking fast. And this 54-year-old woman who was like a little bit heavier set, and I'm in the best shape of my life, is like passing me. I'm just like, if anybody can do this, you know what I mean? It doesn't matter. It's just like grind. It's just pure grind. But since then, you're completely right. It's totally about completing it. Since doing an Ironman, I've like done nothing competitive since then. I was like, I've worked out as much as I need to for the rest of my life. I don't need to do anything else. And it's all just become fun stuff. So now, I mean, like where I am now is totally on the opposite end of the spectrum. If you think about Ironman training and competitive racing, now it's like, oh, let's just go out for a cruise on the 606. And like now with Divvy, it's like much more accessible. It's not like spandex. Spandex is not part of my life anymore, which is I'm relieved and enjoy a little bit more too. Yeah,
I don't blame you for that. Yeah. That's something that I've never been interested in bicycling. I think it's one thing it differentiates those. In most cases, it differentiates those that are like hardcore and into that kind of mm-hmm. like, exercise regimens and let me count my watts and mm-hmm. like all that good stuff. Yep. From those that are more casual riders, and I'm certainly in that other camp. So I think I've now kind of gotten a better picture of where you were coming from, but we're still in the MBA.
Yep.
And you were doing marketing consulting.
Yep.
You were about to graduate. Or
mm-hmm.
were you looking for any specific kind of jobs, or was it anything in mind?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I said, in fact, I never wanted to be a consultant. I had met one consultant. And I was like, ooh, that seems intense. Don't want to do that. And then I met two other women who were consultants, and I was like, wow, I want to be like those women. Like, that sounds impressive and amazing and interesting and dynamic, and you're always working on different clients. So I also stumbled, like a lot of things in my life, like I think I show up prepared, but then kind of stumble into opportunities and like identify they're the right one and go for them. So I ended up in Chicago by way of marketing consulting. It was my first job out of business school, doing brand transformation, kind of growth transformation stuff. The company was called Profit. They're located in the West Loop and kind of a global firm. There's offices from San Francisco to Shanghai. But that brought me to Chicago, where cycling continued to be important. Because it was like, if I had to live my life on the red line, I don't think I could have stayed in Chicago. And cycling broke me out of the red line, right? Like, it broke me out of the fixed route of Chicago and able to experience it so much more.
Interesting. So, I think one of the most interesting things about this conversation is that you went from one of the old school types of marketing, which is driving an Oscar Mayer truck, which even today I'm surprised to hear that it's still a thing.
Yeah.
to some of the more kind of brand transformations and these kinds of things with helping. I'm sure that if you went back to Oscar Mayer, you'd tell them, hey, maybe there's another way, or there's some of those things that you took away from actually how they did things. And I think this also kind of connects to one thing you mentioned earlier, which is that when you were thinking about the people that are consultants, and that's also something that's been surprising to me in life. And I think this ties back to the marketing thing, because so for me, I think the interesting thing about that is that there's always been people that I've looked up to, and I'm like, I want to be like that person, or I think that guy's or that person has this interesting way to look at life. And it's never necessarily one particular thing they do or their job or whatever. Usually it's not that. It's usually that does not define them. So I think that's allowed me to say, all right, it's not about what you do as work. It's more about how you kind of carry yourself through life. And I think this might be kind of the Oscar Mayer thing, when it's not necessarily how you go about marketing, but what you are as a brand and what you're trying to communicate to people, right?
Yeah.
So how was that for you, kind of having most of your experience with this type of old school kind of marketing, and then having to come into some companies and advise on some of the newer things? I'm sure you learned a lot about that in the MBA, but there was some good stuff that you could have brought in from the old school type of marketing.
Yeah. I remember when my boss, the first day of Hot Dog High, which is training for the Weinermobile, which you're right, is old school. It's been around since 1936. He was like, listen, we're here to do two things: sell hot dogs and make magic. And like, that is so pure marketing. It's like, I mean, yes, at the end of the day, you have to sell something. You need to promote something. There's like some unit of transaction that needs to happen, right? But the way to do it is through making magic, right? And making memories. And so even though it's like hot dogs and magic, and like, that's not something you use in healthcare consulting or like fintech, that idea still applies. Like I still think about that as I was talking to companies at my last job. It's like, how are we doing both of these things? How are we delivering? How are we making magic for our customers? And sometimes it's like making enterprise software like a little bit more of a joyful experience, which is a crazy sentence to begin with, but like, how can we take out the complexity and streamline that purchasing process or that use case? So selling hot dogs, making magic, it's applicable across industries.
Yeah, because I don't think you could actually come in here and try to do the Divvy truck, because that would go very much against what Divvy is. But it certainly does feel, and I certainly wanted to get into this, because it certainly does feel that since you've been with the company, a lot of changes have happened. And I guess it starts from the fact that Divvy wanted to get somebody else in the door and start doing things different. I think the very first thing that changed, as I recall, and this was right after we met, was kind of the pricing structure, which is something, that's how we met, through a focus group that was trying to get at what were the important things for the users, right?
Yep.
So I think there's been like nonstop kind of
things
changing since you got into Divvy.
It's been super fun. So consulting is all upstream strategy, or at least in my experience, not all consulting is like this. It was like upstream strategy, big, sexy ideas. And I just like really crave the opportunity to implement something. And so kind of bringing it to Divvy, I was thinking about the best part of my day toward the end of my tenure at my last company. I was like, man, it's my bike ride to and from work every day. I should work in bikes. And so I just started cold LinkedIn calling. And I'm getting to the changes about Divvy, but how I got there, I just started cold LinkedIn outreaching to anybody who would respond to me who worked in bike share. And Elliot, who was the previous GM of Divvy, he responded to me. And I was like, let's grab coffee or Divvy along the lake. Like, would love to just chat with you. And he took me up on that. And so we turned that into a conversation about what are your research needs? Like, what do you not know? Like, where are there opportunities? And I ended up saying, let me come freelance. Let me bring marketing research and writer insights to the organization. You know, you guys have been doing a great job growing and scaling. You've gone from 0 stations, right? Just an idea, in 2013, launching in, 2013 and bringing it to life, to now almost 600 stations. Like, what do we need to think about next? Like, what's the next frontier, right? So since I've joined, it's been super fun. Launching pricing, awesome. Thanks to the focus groups, we did a ton of research to inform that, and I can talk about what those changes were, but talk to members, talked to casual riders who, might just pick up a divvy along the lake, like did intercept studies where we said, hey, let me just talk to you. What are you thinking about? How are you thinking about this? What do you wish it would be? I did ride-alongs, just like cruising along with people on their divvy rides. Like, how are you choosing that station? Like, what are you thinking about there? What is this experience like? Like, what's annoying you right now? To like get at these things, like we don't know where stations are. I'm not from here. I'm from Memphis. Like, I don't know how bike share works. I want to ride longer, right? I don't know where stations are. I can't find one in 30 minutes. All of these insights, right, were coming to life. And that led to the first idea of passing pricing, which was great. It introduced a single ride for $3, just like you buy a single ride on the train. It's single ride, 30 minutes, $3, or $6 an hour. We introduced kind of an overhauled day pass, so it's an explorer pass. It allows you to ride longer. So for all those families that just want to like cruise along the lakefront, now they can take up to 3-hour trips, and they can do as many of those as they want over 24 hours. And then members were like, we're members, like give us more.
Right.
You were one of them, right? And so we increased the member time limit to 45 minutes. So that was like the most fun thing to roll out and like actually bring to market.
Yeah, I think that was funny because I think when you go into a focus group like that, you're like, I have all these complaints but not a lot of solutions, right?
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
I think when you guys put it all together, it was like, oh, here we go.
Nice.
That makes sense too.
Good. That's exactly what we wanted.
Yeah, no, I think the interesting thing for me, stepping a little bit back, is that I think a lot of us, well, I'm not going to say a lot of us, but at least for me, with undertaking kind of these kind of new things, at least when I was finishing my MBA and I was kind of looking out there for a job, there's a lot of like self-doubt when you don't know if you could actually kind of come in and change a company, even with the skills that you have. I think somebody that my wife, who's a psychologist, has told me in the past, something that stays with me, that it always looks easier. It always, from your perspective, it looks like people have it all figured out. It looks like it's easy for people. But I'm sure that it was as hard as it is the process of like kind of figuring out how you could bring value to some company, or how to like even just come in as an outside consultant. I think you did something that was pretty I think took a lot of guts, right? Which is come in and say, hey, I can fix a lot of stuff. I can really revamp a lot of things for you guys. Was this something that you kind of already in your head had some solutions? Because I know you didn't come from biking. So to some degree, I kind of feel that you were wanting to be that person that could find these solutions, but you didn't really have them.
Yeah. Well, there was like scary parts along the whole thing. The point about like people just show their highlight reel, right, and not the real raw footage is so true. The real story was I quit my job without a full-time offer lined up. So my last consulting company, I accepted a freelance work with Divvy, but it was temporary. I had no idea. And I was like, I'm just going to go for this. I had an amazing boyfriend at the time, who's now a fiance, who was like, I'm going to support you in this decision and we'll figure it out. I turned down an amazing job offer with another company to take a significant pay cut, but to work at Divvy, because I was like, this is a cool company and I see a future for it, right? So there were decisions along the way of like, is Divvy the right choice? And time again, it was like, it's an amazing company, mission driven, something I believe in. And like, there are a lot of reasons to go to work besides a paycheck. One of them is my walk to work is 5 minutes. That's great. Nice. It's so short, I can barely even bike to work. But the other is like, I get to be this change agent and come in and change things. In terms of actually making it happen, I brought the strategy and could compile all those insights I'd heard from focus groups and ride-alongs and the like, but like, I'd never implemented anything, right? Like I had made hot dog jokes, and then I created growth strategy platforms, but I hadn't like made change in an organization like that before. So that was tough too. You don't want to insult somebody's baby, right? Like you have a new baby, like right. You're coming into a company that's 4 years old, and that's both new, but also old, right? Like there are ways of doing things, but it's still very new. So not everything you're doing is perfect, right? So it was coming in and figuring out what needs to be done, how do you do it effectively, how do you do it in a way that engages a team instead of alienates them. So it was a big learning curve coming into Divvy. The things I never even thought about was like, oh, our user agreement needs to be translated to French. How do I do that? Or like, oh, how are we thinking about taxes? So there were just so many micro learning things that like definitely screwed some things up along the way, but then, it turns out fine. So that's the story you tell, but there were a lot of decisions and steps along the way that got to, what is a product and pricing stuff I'm really proud of.
Yeah, no, I think it's worked out great from where I'm sitting. But I think,
that's all that matters.
No, and
great.
I think, and that was what I was gonna get to, that I'm sort of this kind of easy to please person, because being not from Chicago or being not from the U.S., coming from Mexico, just not getting killed in the road is like a major thing. I think a lot of what happens over there is that people think that a bike lane or maybe bike share programs are going to fix kind of the culture, but it's not that. It's more about just respecting the cyclist that's out there, right? So when I came to the city and realized that kind of cars stop for pedestrians way before the line, and that overall I think you're respected more as a cyclist, that was a huge one for me. And then furthermore, realizing that I don't have to be taking my bike anywhere with me and worrying about where I leave it, and that there's this huge bike share program in addition to all the infrastructure that's already there for public transportation in the city. It was like a really big perk of being here. I think since I always carry my key with me, it's sometimes when I'm at lunch from work, I'm like, there's a station between here and the place I want to go eat at, and it's just probably is going to save me 5 minutes because it's a 10-minute walk, but I like biking, so it seems like a luxury. But I think once you get into the more deeper into it, once I started to talk to the community here and the cycling community, and I realized that there's all these kind of nuances about it, and how people view it. Certainly there's the hardcore cyclists that are like, oh, DV people suck, like they're just in the way, and that certainly was took me by surprise, because I don't think I fit into what a typical Divvy rider is, and I've certainly done quite a few things in cycling. So I was surprised that there's all these stereotypes, and then there was all these things about pricing. And I think that the one thing that surprised me the most, which I wanted to get at, is that this neighborhood in Chicago, right, Oak Park, kind of was at odds with Divvy. And it seems like, from where I'm standing, which is I don't know a lot about it, it seems like to them as a city, they were in some sort of way contributing to the costs of these DV programs, and they were not. From their view, they were not getting the rewards that they were expecting. So I think two things that I wanted to talk about here is that, one, I didn't know that kind of Divvy and the city kind of work together. So that's a piece of it. And then the second thing is that obviously there's a lot of individuals out there who don't see the greater good that comes from a Divvy program, other than just the immediate benefits that you get from saving on gas or maybe traffic. So
I mean, there's both individual benefits and citywide benefits, right? So I think, to your point about people don't always understand how Divvy works, Divvy's owned by the city of Chicago.
Okay.
So Chicago owns all of the blue bikes and all of the stations, and Divvy actually makes money for the city. Not necessarily recouping all of that back from rider revenues, like your annual membership and single ride fares. That's a significant portion of revenue. But then, in addition to the title sponsorship with Blue Cross Blue Shield, so all of that nets the city multi-million multiple millions of dollars a year, which then goes back into brand or bike ambassadors and other bike safety events and programming. So that's one of the great things about Divvy, is not only is it a great community resource, but it also supports other community resources. Another one being Divvy for Everyone, which is our $5 annual membership that's for income qualified people. So if you're below a certain amount, and you can look that up on Divvy for Everyone, just Google it on Divvy, you can get a $5 annual membership, which is great. And that contributes to bike share is part of transportation, right? It's part of the transportation network. So there will be stations that get a ton of use and some that get none. So kind of how this relates to Oak Park. Oak Park, chose to withdraw from the Divvy system. They were contributing a little bit more as a city subsidy. And that's based on like economic arrangements that I won't bore you with, but based on when they joined the system, they didn't participate in Blue Cross Blue Shield sponsorship money. So they were contributing. They chose to withdraw. We're definitely disappointed about that. I think the sense in the community was like, we don't really even have the infrastructure yet. And what they want to use, those Divvy funds for now is developing better bike infrastructure. So bike share is part of it. You're right. Bike infrastructure is part of it. A culture of biking, awareness, tolerance, acceptance, and enthusiasm. That's all part of it as well. So we're definitely bummed to see Oak Park, choose to withdraw. They were seeing growth, just not as quick of a pace of growth as the new board ultimately wanted.
So then, this I didn't know. So then, just taking a step back, Divvy though is kind of operated by this separate company, right?
Yep.
That operates several bike share programs, such as I think the very first one I came into contact with, which is the one in New York.
Yep.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
So they're the ones that are operating these programs, but then at the end of the day, the city owns them? Is that how it works?
Yeah, bike share is an interesting world, and there are different economic arrangements in many different cities. So in Chicago owns the bikes, and Motivate, kind of the company that I'm employed with, operates them. In DC, it's similar. In New York, it's a little bit different. There's different economic arrangements. So, it's like volumes of contracts as well. So it changes. There's different arrangements in every city.
Yeah, I'm sure, because once you, like you said, especially cities, much more difficult than companies, have their own way to do things. So I'm sure once you get in there and you say, hey, maybe that's all you can say is we're interested in operating a bike program within your city, but then you get all these, well, where is that going to be made? What's this bike going to be looking like? So maybe all that's a back and forth between the city and that management company. But then that to me tells me that there's not this typical pursuit of kind of profits as there is in your typical like Uber program or anything like that, because even though the management company is looking to profit from these services that are being provided, the actual program, which is the bike share, which is what I pay for in a membership, it's not necessarily looking to make a profit.
Yeah,
it's looking
you
for
can tell
something
you're a
else.
finance guy. You can definitely tell. Yeah, there's cost sharing, there's profit sharing, there's all sorts of different like economic streams that do make it beneficial. At the end of the day, what Motivate wants and what Chicago wants are more people pedaling our bikes, right? Everybody wins when we increase that. So there's definitely a joint desire for that, and the best part is through title sponsorship. It helps subsidize any times where your operational expenses exceed your revenues. So I think everybody wants more people pedaling. Divvy's up to 37,000 members from 0 5 years ago. We're about to hit our 5th birthday. We've given more than 1 million people have ridden Divvy bikes since it started. We're about to hit 15 million rides. So if there's one thing both the city of Chicago want, it's more people riding the bikes, and luckily that continues to be the case.
Yeah, and the reason I kind of brought that up, more than kind of being the finance guy, I think all of us at the back of our minds are like, what are they trying to get at with this kind of price? I certainly do it when I go to expensive restaurants where you see like this very nice door and you're paying for it. There's this really nice kind of table and the silverware, and you're paying for it because it's going to be the same food as somewhere else, but it's just going to be more expensive. So I think you kind of start thinking about that and you're like, oh, they're ripping me off. But it's hard to say that with a program like that. And the more interesting aspect about it is that if the program itself, not the management company, is not looking at getting certain revenues, then what are some of these metrics that they're looking after? I'm sure there's an overall goal of maybe reducing traffic or something very obvious, but is there anything else from there?
There's definitely still revenue goals. There's revenue goals for
Okay.
Divvy. There's revenue goals for like the city as it pertains to sponsorship. There's number of people who are writing is always something we're looking at. Number of people who are members or just accounts. I mean, I think in this new single ride world, we're going to have less people saying, I need to ride all year, right? They're going to say, I'll just string together single rides every time I need them, which is totally fine. So I think we continue to look at all of those things. Every year we look at like how many millions of pounds of carbon offset that, are offset through Divvy
I
bikes.
love that about you get that information for yourself.
Which is great. Like we can
yes.
provide that at the individual level. And so that helps, I think. Annual members love that. I mean, you can get a Divvy membership for less than a monthly CTA pass. Like, that is amazing, right? So I don't think anybody has to worry about Divvy ripping them off. It's probably like the opposite end. Like, it is such a good deal to get an annual membership. You take that a couple times, and I mean, it's Divvy for a whole year for $99.
Yeah, no, that said, that was really quick for me to realize when I just got to the city. I was like, wait, what? Yeah, no, I'm definitely going for this. And it's been great because I use it way more than I thought. Like recently with that gold thing, I thought winter, I was like, I thought I didn't use it that much. But then I was like, no, wait, because at least once getting to work and then back to work, I'm using it, so I should be there, right?
This is a good story, and it actually came out of your focus group. So the gold thing you're talking about is Divvy Gold, which is if you took 10 or more trips during this month-long challenge we were doing. It coincided with the Olympics, although I have to say it had nothing to do with the Olympics for trademark reasons. So if you rode 10 or more times in this month-long window in the middle of winter, we'd give you Divvy Gold. Now, Divvy has done that in the past, but it's never been a big blown out thing. And actually one of the girls in your focus group mentioned how proud. She was like, I got Divvy Gold. And I was like, that's awesome. We need to do more of that. Like, does the number one rider of Divvy know they're the number one rider of Divvy, right? Do our top riders know that? Like, let's celebrate that, right? Like, let's make them feel proud of how much they ride. So this winter, and to keep it brief, like we did this whole Divvy Gold campaign. If you took 10 or more rides, you got invited to this party, which like ended up being awesome. It was at Emporium, we gave everybody food and sweet Divvy Gold stuff. And it was a great time. Like, people loved it. So we think we'll definitely do that again. And the other thing people love is like, yeah, trips taken is cool, but like one other stat we've heard people rallying around is how many stations they visited to. So just like I said at the beginning, like I couldn't live my life on the red line. It's like A to B, right? With Divvy, you can go A, B, Z, D, F, H, K. So maybe doing something around stations and number of neighborhoods you visited and something like that. We think that might be cool.
Yeah, no, for sure. Thinking about it when I just got here, because I've also been here for 2 years, and my wife and I have biked to a lot of places, and like I said in the focus group, I'm forever grateful with Divvy because, I mean, I met my wife when I was 15, and it's been a long ride, certainly on and off, but we've had huge fights whenever I've tried to get her into biking. Mm-hmm. And granted, being a mountain biker, trying to get her on some of these trails wasn't the best way to go about it.
It's not easy. That's not an easy ask.
But that Divvy bike really helped her with her confidence. And obviously we started off with the simple kind of routes.
Yeah.
And she loves kind of venturing out to new places. I don't that much. I'm like, I find my place. Yeah. But then that's a good compromise because now we're biking. I like biking. And then we get to new spots. So yeah, that's awesome. Definitely incentivizing some of these people that like to kind of explore the city that way, which is, I think it's a great way to do so. And I think I think going back to something you mentioned earlier, that really caught my eye is that when you mentioned that you did the Oscar Mayer thing, which was kind of driving around, mm-hmm. That's not just staying stationary in one mm-hmm. place or the other, right?
Yeah.
It's going like road tripping.
Yeah, 22
out there.
States in a year. So
how is now for you being kind of stuck, or not stuck, but within the same kind of city and looking at the same kind of things?
Now we're getting into tough relationship talk. I feel like my fiance and I have this talk. Like, are we going to stay? Are we going to go?
Oh, God. Okay. Wow.
I mean, I've moved every 2 years of my life, basically. And so now I'm hitting year 3 in Chicago. But Chicago has so much to offer. I mean, I feel like lived in 3 neighborhoods since I've been here. And it's just like each time you move, it almost feels like you move to a different city. For better or worse, like we all know Chicago has a lot of to have so many neighborhood differences is not always a good thing, right? But in one way, it does make you feel like you're living in a new place all the time. So I have to say this because my fiance may listen to this. I'm totally happy here, babe. We don't need to.
No, and speaking of which, I think you guys that was because I think one thing that's been really cool about this whole experience, and I think also about me using cycling to get to know a city and some of the people within it, is that after we did that focus group, we became friends, and I started following you on social media, and I realized, obviously, well, you realized that I had a baby, and now she's 5 months old. We love her, my wife and I, and you recently got engaged, and you did this kind of whole trip around it, Oscar Mayer style.
Yeah,
maybe that's kind of
totally.
that's kind of helping you in that way to last a few more years. So how was that? I think from what I saw, it seems like you guys went to Utah and then kind of ventured out there with a van, kind of doing the van life thing.
Yeah.
I didn't even know you could do that.
No, we were like trying to think of how we got to it. So we knew we wanted to go to the Southwest. We wanted to go somewhere warm. We landed in Vegas. We picked up a camper van. I have to do a shameless plug because this van company was so amazing. EscapeCamperVans.com. Amazing people. Karen, hello. So we picked it up in Vegas, and then we went to
and just I didn't even know you could do that you could rent
and it was
a van.
Dirt cheap, $470 for the whole week. I mean,
but that's the idea, right? You didn't just rent a van. It was a van kind of to go out there and road
It was
trip.
a van. It had seats in the back. They turned into a table and then turned into a bed, a queen size bed, which is like a good way to get engaged. It's like, let's get engaged,
sure.
then only live out of a van for 7 days and not talk to anybody else. Are we still in love? Okay, let's get married.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, so we did that, and that was a great time. So we did Red Rocks. We did Death Valley, which was super cool. We didn't even know, we didn't even look it up. We didn't even know what to expect. And then Joshua Tree, and then the Hoover Dam, all in a giant camper van with graffiti on the side, and it was awesome.
Yeah, I saw
we're still
that.
engaged, so
That was pretty
worked out
cool.
well.
Yeah, it was a black van, right?
with it was called Foxy because I had a fox painted on it, and it was like these LA graffiti artists that do the entire fleet.
Oh, so all vans are different.
Yeah, they're
color,
all different names, different colors. Yeah, they're super fun.
Yeah, the people in marketing for Oscar Mayer would be like, "What are you guys doing?
Yeah, they'd be like, we're too polished for that."
Yeah, you got to put a big sign that says like "Vans for Rent" on the top. No, that's pretty cool. So and you met your now fiance where? Was it
online?
Here?
Ordered him off the internet. Oh, that sounds your question. Yeah, I met him in Chicago.
Yeah, because I think you mentioned that before. Yeah, so a lot of things have happened since you got to Chicago. That's pretty cool. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, no, it's been a pretty great ride, and so. Yeah, I mean, luckily, like, Nick is into cycling, right? Or my fiance, he's done RAGBRAI and stuff like that. So having that shared, like, even when he told me he had done RAGBRAI, like, now I know he doesn't, like, bike that much. Like, he hates biking in the city, probably as much as your wife does. I, like, have to, like, pull his teeth to come ride in the city because he's not used to it. He, works in the suburb. But even just knowing, okay, he's done one biking thing, I'm like, cool, dude. Would have a second date with.
Yeah, no, that sounds pretty cool. And I think, to me, the overall thing that's been interesting about meeting you is I think you've managed to, first and foremost, adapt a lot. I think as we hear from cycling, all these things have come your way, which I think are great. But I think overall, it's something that a lot of us have a hard time with. I also work as a consultant, and I also find it that a lot of times it's pretty boring, right? But I think you've managed to, one, find a way to kind of make it more of your own thing. And then two, you found kind of a way to inch yourself up to the opportunities that you've wanted to get at, right? So I think that's also one thing I wanted to get to, because I think going back to how you think being a consultant is, there's one thing that we generally kind of stereotype of what a consultant is, and it's this very squared person that kind of thinks in numbers and provides some solutions that may and most likely will not have practical applications, right? So it's just a recommendation, and the consultant gets out, and then you're left with this thing that you have no way to know how to apply. But I think you went way further than that, because I think a lot of these changes that have come with Divvy, you're very involved with. I'd like to say that since I met you and since since I've gotten to know a little bit more about Divvy, I've just seen more Divvy everywhere, and one could argue that it's first and foremost because I became friends with you, so then that kind of gets more into, I mean, there's all these algorithms out there in the social media world that are getting that to me, but I think that has another side, which means that you've been so involved with it that you kind of embody this kind of new DV culture that you want to put out there. And in general, to me now, when I think of Divvy, I think a lot about you, which is kind of a new face and certainly things changing. So I don't know if all of this was intended, but I'm sure there's a lot right there to unpack in terms of how to be a good consultant, how to actually take your job and make it so that it becomes what you love.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm so flattered. So thank you. That's awesome. I'll chalk half of it up to like just social media and now being in the same circles. But you're not the only person to say that. Yeah. In terms of like how driving impact so quickly, because I do think Divvy has done some like really amazing things in the past year, and some of it's marketing, but a lot of it's like our amazing operations team that's done things too. I think a couple things have have supported me being high impact. First was like the ability to know how to create strategy and then deliver it, but like rally a team and enthusiasm around it. So like my energy for it, like telling the story and saying like why it was helpful. I played for my entire team sound bites from our focus group, like sound bites from people on the lakefront. I work with a bunch of bike nerds, right? They had never heard someone say, I think I can go a mile in 30 minutes of biking, right? I played to them a clip of a girl who was visiting who thought she could go a mile, and she also thought she had the bike for like the whole day. And when you bring those raw insights in a way that's like actually going to compel the team, like I could tell them that, but like who am I to say that? To bring the voices of the consumers actually saying what's wrong with your service to life, like then it didn't have to be my voice, right? It was your voice, right? Talking about not having bikes available, and like, okay, what do we do to solve that? Like, how can we implement all day valets so that we always have bike and dock availability? So I think that helped. I think the other thing that helped is Divvy's a small organization, so that's like a little bit of a cop out, but we're still young, we're still nimble, it's not a big hierarchy, so you can just kind of come in there and storm and like push ideas to the top with enough enthusiasm. But at a broader level, like things anybody can apply, I looked at my life and said, what do I love? What do I want to do? And it was biking. I was like, that's the best part of my day. And it was cold LinkedIn outreaching. Anybody can do that. Anyone can say like, what do I like doing? How do I want to apply it? Who do I know? And I didn't know anybody in biking. So I just started looking at fellow alumni. I started looking at people in Chicago. Anybody can do that, whether you're in biking or, your passion is like pottery, right? It could be anything. So I think, leveraging my passion, thinking about it, and then just like, elbow grease or, just grit helped push some of that stuff through. Just keep at it.
Yeah, and I'm sure the fact that it's a small organization speaks to two things. One, obviously, there had to be a lot of willingness from their part to make those changes, but also that there's very few people kind of driving those changes. I'm sure there's not like a huge team behind you kind of helping you implement all this. Am I wrong? No,
you're completely right. When I joined, I was director of marketing. I had one member care associate who, does most like key fulfillments and that sort of thing. Now I have a team of 5, which is great. We're building that capacity out, and it's really been establishing the role of marketing at Divvy, right? Like we've been operational centric. Like we're creating a 6,000 bike share network, and a lot of operational challenges have been a part of that. I'm coming in there saying, for the next wave of growth, we're going to need to be more customer centric. We'll need to do more marketing. And so I think that story is pretty understandable from the team. And so they've some quick wins like pricing, like this Divvy Gold thing. They were just new and sexy, and it's empowered me to help drive that capacity forward in the organization. Yeah, and like everybody's excited about it. That's the best part.
No, I bet. And I think, one thing that would come to mind to me at the beginning is that certainly coming in, there were certainly plenty of things that needed some change, and the change was overdue. I think there's going to be another challenge going forward that now that those changes have been made, kind of where do you go from here. I think there's plenty of challenges ahead, but I think your approach seems to be, we'll listen to the customer first, and there's going to be a lot of kind of information coming from that end that will inform kind of how you go about things. Are you hearing new things about this new pricing change, or now that, because that's something I found, that once you please people in one regard, that it's something else comes to the table that wasn't there, wasn't an issue before.
Okay, so one of the best days of my professional career was launching this pricing, and when you give members 15 more minutes, which is essentially 50% more time for free, like the amount of love that poured into our inbox was extraordinary. Launching this single ride, which admittedly was overdue, right? We didn't know when we launched Bike Share that how to think about pricing, and now the world has evolved, and it's very clear that like a single ride is something you have to offer. So I think there was just an overjoyous response to that. I think the next things we're going to be thinking about and solving is like, as you have more people, how do you make bikes more available? Expectations are increasing, right? So with Uber and Lyft, it's not just enough to have a taxi nearby. It's like it needs to be on my block. So we're thinking a lot about like what on my block means for bike share, right? I think there's citywide adoption that we're thinking about. So part of my team is our outreach team, which is thinking about expansion zones. And most recently, we expanded on the south and west side. And how do we increase ridership there in neighborhoods where they may not feel like Divvy's for them? So we're doing a ton of work reaching out to people on the south and west sides, doing exactly what you're talking about, listening, making sure that we hear their concerns. What do they need, right? Like we just introduced Spanish languages on our kiosk stickers. That wasn't previously around, right? So we have a huge proportion of the city that speaks that literally speaks that language. How are we serving them? How are we meeting them with the right products and services? Divvy for Everyone's another example of that. So whether it's like technology innovations, like how we be more mobile first, more accessible, more convenient, how we have new products and services, which motivate as a corporation does a lot of thinking about, to like how we show up in our communities. We're thinking about all that stuff, and it all starts with listening, which is really fun because I think that's like Divvy's doing a lot more of that now.
Yeah, no, and that's some of the things that I've heard were going to be some of the big challenges, because there's a disproportionate amount, from what I've heard, of Divvy stations in the north than in the south, correct? So it's good to hear that there's some things, because one, there's certainly an opportunity there, and two, I think there shouldn't necessarily be that kind of difference, right? So it makes sense to kind of go and address that. In these times that you've been reaching out, and certainly since when you arrived and reached out to us, have there been surprising things to you that you were like, that's something? Because I think most of what we've talked about was kind of obvious, and most people had it in their back of their mind, like the pricing structure and single rides and this and that. Was there something else that you've been hearing about Divvy that's been pretty surprising to you, whether that be in some of these new kind of efforts to reach out to people or before?
Yeah, I'll give you two examples. I'll give you like a serious example of something that we're taking pretty seriously and thinking about how to improve, and then I'll give you like kind of the funny one that's become the running joke, but something we also take seriously. I think how Divvy is perceived in neighborhoods that don't have high adoption. So in Lincoln Park, people are divvying all the time. They love Divvy, right? Like Divvy's all over. But in South and West Side communities, there's a sense that Divvy just dropped down, right? That it might feel like gentrification. And I came from Lincoln Park, so I never thought about that. So my team that lives and breathes this has like done a great job of bringing that insight back to the organization and how we think about things. It's everything from the types of ads that are on our stations. Like, is a Land's End ad something that should be showing up in Englewood, for example? I'm not saying it's not, but like, how do we think about every part of that experience, whether it's the Spanish language stickers or the types of kind of messaging and activation we do around that? So that we're taking pretty seriously. We have a team of 2 full-time employees completely dedicated to outreach, talking to community groups, bringing that insight back to Divvy. talking to aldermen or city officials, really the gamut of people, how they can help bring Divvy to life. And then outreach leaders, we were just about to hire 5 outreach leaders to help embody that and bring that to life in the summer as well. So that's something pretty serious that we're really investing behind, both emotionally, financially, with people, all sorts of things on that effort. The funny surprise, sticky grips. Sometimes I felt like Divvy's handlebars were sticky. A lot of people feel like Divvy's handlebars are sticky. I brought that back to the organization. Total running joke, like, oh, sticky grips. I took back an image of someone using gym wipes on our grips. That is enough to instill change. So we are changing out all of our grips. It's not going to happen overnight, but we are starting to phase in new grips that are a little bit less sticky. So yeah, that was something kind of funny. Men's Health did a thing about bike share grips, and I was like, we're on it. We're working on it. We're ahead of the game. So that was something I was surprising, but we're tackling it.
That's definitely a thing, and I think one of the things that came up in the focus group was some of us more seasoned users of Divvy. How do we tell which are the bikes that are likely going to be in good shape? And yeah, that's certainly a thing, or was. I haven't had much of that, and I think mainly because I wear gloves now in the wintertime to Divvy, but it's nice to know that these things are being addressed.
Let me know if you have sticky grips. Hopefully you won't. We're working on it. So
the interesting thing is I won't be here come summer. Yeah, no, I think all these kind of efforts on my end for making a move to a more friendlier environment for me.
No, are you moving?
West Coast.
What? Oh, what? Where are you guys moving?
San Diego. Yeah.
What?
Yeah, and it's been it's tough because from one end you're like, oh wow, West Coast finally happening for me, but on the other hand you're like, oh, I really had become acquainted with this city more so
and
than
the
I
Midwest.
thought. The Midwest.
Oh my
yeah.
God.
No, I think there's
the Pacific Coast when you got Lake Michigan and the Midwest.
Yeah, no.
Wow.
I think
congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think the people is a big thing here. Even just reading Yelp reviews and stuff over there in apartments and things, you're like, oh, these is California people and their complaints. But yeah, no. I'm trying to follow in the footsteps of people that I admire, of being like, follow what you want and try to get closer to kind of where you want to be. And I think a lot of the change that I've been seeking has been because of that, because I've tried to not be kind of just okay with things. And I think life puts you in this situation or this other thing. And I didn't know a lot about Chicago. I basically moved here for a job. So I was looking and found something. So.
Nice.
But yeah, no, I think and with talking about different cities and talking about looking at it from like taking a step back, I think bike share in general is something really that does a lot of good to cities. I think, but the unfortunate thing is that obviously I'm very biased with this. So when I try to think or pinpoint some of the things that are really beneficial, it's hard to go through them. And one thing that comes to mind is somebody that talked about in ethics and in philosophy, how to determine if something's ethical or something's makes sense in the philosophical sort of way. And a lot of it is by saying, what if everybody did it? What if it became policy? What if everybody rode a bike, right? And I think that's where Divvy or in general bike shares are good, because I don't think there's nothing but good things would
I'm
come.
literally trying to think of, what if everyone rode bikes? Like, I can't think of any negative. Like, we need more bike parking.
Well, there'd be the attitude, right? I mean, sure, bikers have attitude sometimes, but it's not a car that can do like enormous amounts of damage that generally you're not kind of aware of, because you're in this enclosed space with like air conditioner. But once you're in a bike, you realize that obviously cars are heavy and dangerous. So I don't see anything negative, but I certainly see that there are things that are not so obvious about what bike share does to neighborhoods or cities or communities. Can you talk a little bit about what you've seen, or what do you think in that regard?
I think bike share has, like I said, biking opens up cities, right? It creates super accessible transportation. It serves as a last mile connector, right? So for someone who has to walk a mile to the train, whether it's the red line, the pink line, the blue line, whatever it is, it connects them to that. Not done well, not communicating to communities. This is a new program that's coming in. This is how it's going to help you. This is how it's going to support you. It can easily be done wrong in a way that may confuse them or make them worried or concerned, right? So just like the 606 is this amazing platform, in some communities, if the 606 came in, it's like, oh, well, are we going to be displaced, right? So even though it's an amenity, it can also be a scary thing. So I think biking is incredible. It opens up the city. It's an amazing resource. Divvy in particular has done a great job of opening up the city and making it affordable through the Divvy for Everyone program. I think community engagement continues to be something we focus on for sure. Engaging communities, encouraging communities to ride. But I think it's just going to continue to grow. I think bike share as a global trend is skyrocketing. So mark my words, 5 years, you are going to see a whole heck of a lot more bikes, scooters, other forms of mobility than you see today, which is awesome.
And I just, from my end, I think it just makes sense. I think one time being a video editor, one of the things that was very eye-opening to me about wanting to edit bike films and that kind of thing was that a lot of the new stuff and the cutting edge stuff came from snowboarding and skiing. But that seems way less intuitive to me than bike. I'm sure a lot more people know how to bike than those who know how to ski, and yet a lot of resorts around the country have way more revenues coming in from the skiing and the winter sports, even when they are shorter and small, the season is shorter than they do from biking. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to grow, for one. And I think generally people know what to do with it, and you don't need to inform them that much. Sure, there's ways to go about a program, but I didn't need a lot of information as to how to use the Divvy program. Once I was like, oh, there's a station here, there's a station there. This works. Yes. Yeah. You guys have certainly made it easier with a lot of the things like the transit app and all that good stuff, where I can see if there's going to be docks available where I'm going to be. But the funny thing is that when I bring certainly some of these things up to my more hardcore bike friends who would never touch a Divvy, is that yes, there are certainly pictures going around of people misusing them. I remember seeing a picture of a Divvy in the lake, and another one of a Divvy mounted on a bus rack.
Hey, that's we don't have any problems with that. That is the lake one. We don't love those, and those are few and far between. The bus thing is first and last mile transportation. I'm not totally sure the use case for that. Bike share is pretty intuitive, right? With 600 stations, you kind of get it. You can take it and return it anywhere. Do people sometimes, mess around with them? Sometimes, yes. But they're also pretty expensive. So that person who had to put it in the lake, that's on them. But generally, I think, for being a public asset, our bikes are treated super well. We've only retired something like less than 50 bikes in the 6 years they've been around. That's 6,000 bikes, or 5 years we've been around. Sorry, I'm getting my numbers a little jumbled. That's amazing. Those are super sustainable bikes. To think about how many bikes or how many trips they've given. We do an amazing job of upkeeping them. They get annual tunes every year. Every bike is checked once a month, every month. That's amazing. Your own bike's not getting that. I used to be one of those people, those bike snobs. So first I was the triathlete, then I had the road bike, and I was like, Divvies for nerds. I really didn't know what to make of it. A friend of mine gave me her annual fob, her annual membership when she moved. And I was like, this is life-changing. This is so cool. So I would tell your snobby bike friends, try it out, because there are times it's pouring rain in the morning. And maybe your friends are so hardcore they ride even in the rain, but I loved it. Rains in the morning, take a Divvy at night. Going to the bar, Divvy to the bar, and then figure out your own way home. Anytime you're meeting friends and don't want to worry about having a bike, right? It's so great to have. So I'm I was kind of skeptical about Divvy at first, but now I'm just like, this is amazing. I use it more than like it's like at least 1/3 of my biking is done on a Divvy, if not more.
Yeah, sometimes it feels like, I remember my wife and I when we both had the membership, and the bars that we wanted to go were a mile away, and we were like, is this a lot? Like, there's a weird aspect of like, we're not going to spend on Uber. We want to drink. Is there something weird? And no, like, you can make it out there and then make it back. No problems, no hassle. Yeah. And it was like, yeah,
you don't care how short your trips are. You were embarrassed about that 5-minute Divvy ride where it's like from this Divvy station to the very next one. That's totally okay. I used to do that to get to the train. It's like, yeah, okay, it saves me time. Like, who cares? No, we don't care how short your rides are. It's totally fine.
Yeah, no,
it's encouraged.
I personally, I think it's been great, and I was surprised. I think from that question I asked, there was going to be certainly maybe to a certain extent you having way more stories about some of the difficulties of kind of getting people to understand the program or misusing the bikes. But it seems like first and foremost, the bikes are pretty kind of indestructible. And then second, that again, it's intuitive, and there is some sort of like liability if you mess around with it too much. No, that sounds great. And I think in typical Cyclists of Chicago tradition for our podcast, now that we're getting closer to our time limit, I wanted to kind of do some of the typical questions that we ask the guests. And one of them is, certainly now that you're more of a cycler, and in different aspects, both as I know that you haven't done it that much since, but triathlete and also a commuter. Do you have any particular specific piece of gear that's been surprisingly great and a favorite of yours?
Okay, so I use the term selling hot dogs and making magic. Like, I'm a very magic-oriented person and very whimsical. So I would have to say my pink handlebar tape on my bright green bike. So the bike that I rode for Ironman was bright green. I put this pink tape on it, and then it got the name Watermelon Fury. And this bike is, I mean, it's like my personal brand. When I did Ironman, these little like 9-year-old girls were like, "That's such a cool bike!" And it's like mile 80, and I'm drenched in sweat and like tears. And for like that 1 second, I felt like really cool again, you know. So that bike was my first bike. That handlebar tape helped make it feel my own. So that's probably my favorite. And I don't even know if it counts as gear, but I just like love that tape.
No, that's kind of exactly what we're looking for. Good. There's always odd things that for some people are particularly. For me, it's stuff that's reliable. I just hate stuff breaking down on me. And even some of the best brands out there. I remember one time when I was out in Palos, like me being from Mexico, having one of my first snow rides. I was at the furthest point from heading back to the trailhead. And it was the trails were covered in snow, and my $100 clipless pedals broke. Yeah, one of them, just the spindle broke, and I was like, "Oh wow, great! This awesome pedal." I'm sure that come up with whatever generic brand of like a normal pedal wouldn't have broken because it's not that complex, right? And I just posted a picture about like how like this things happen. And fortunately, one of the brand representatives reached out, and he was like, nice. "Oh, we'll get you another one."
Nice. Okay, that's great.
Brought me back to being on that brand, but it's certainly not my favorite product. I can't tell you it is.
Reliable things.
Yes.
Especially when it's like your livelihood, right? I mean, that's like key.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and you're gonna stop riding for a bit. It's gonna take you.
This backpack, this Timbuktu backpack, I bought it on Black Friday. I spilled bacon grease on it, and you can't even tell. Like, this is 3 years old.
Yeah,
bacon grease. Water resistant. It's bacon grease resistant. Like, where is that in the Amazon review?
Yeah, the bacon grease would date a bag.
Nope.
It looks pretty new to me. That's impressive.
So I add that to your list of products to buy.
To that extent, is there a favorite brand of yours? I mean, I know certainly Divvy's up there.
Yes,
was
Divvy.
It before?
Well, no, I thought it was for nerds, and then now I'm like, this is the transformational. Like, this is the best thing, $99 annual membership. You should buy one now. It's cheaper than the CTA. $99 for a whole year. So Divvy, of course, obvious first choice. Then fun brands that make cycling fun. So Nutcase helmets, like those watermelon helmets.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Those are, I mean, they're just so fun and so silly and just dorky. They're just very fun. And then Po Campo bags, which are like, they started out making bags for bike share actually, but they do super cute panniers and just bags that fit on your bike, and they just make cycling, like, it feels very Dutch. It feels very just like cool, part of your life. It's not spandex, right? Like, none of these are spandex brands. And then I do my second bike I ever bought. It's a Momentum bike, and on the shaft it says ride happy, and I just love that. Like, it's like, yes, that's exactly what I want to do. That bike's name is Cherry Bomb, and it has a cup holder in it that I put flowers in that changes seasonally, so it's like a Christmas tree over the holidays. But like, that bike has given me so much happiness. So those are my 3 brands, I guess.
Wow, and I think this kind of brings us back around to what this podcast is all about, because you're naming brands that, to your point, they are kind of going to the more unique aspects of the users, which is not necessarily that type of spandex person that you imagine. I think the overall point of this podcast is that cyclists are more just general people that just happen to cycle.
Yes, exactly.
and yes, they're gonna have different. So I was surprised when I went to pick a bike helmet for my wife. I didn't want to have any input, because I think a helmet is one of the most key things, because if you dread the helmet that you're gonna have to put on, you don't want to bike.
Yeah.
So if you're kind of excited about the helmet, then
like,
you just want to find
my bike is Watermelon Fury. I have the watermelon helmet.
And you want to find you want to find an excuse to go out biking. And I think what surprised me the most is I would have thought my wife was gonna go for something like that, but me not informing her about anything, she went directly to this skate, like not skate, but like BMX type, more serious helmet. And I was like, I wanted to tell her, but I was like, you like this? And I'm like, you don't like this? And she's like, no, I like this. This is something I could wear. And I'm like, oh, let's get that for you. So then my wife is this person who, for her, biking is just a matter of practicality, not a thing. Yeah. Who's wearing this very serious, like, BMX type helmet.
And doesn't know any better, which is great. That's awesome.
Which is, absolutely great. You don't need to. I think you don't need to be anything to bike. And I think other than that, the other portion of the typical questions that we do in for Cyclists of Chicago, which is, again, plugging it in there, also part of the chain link, which is an actual, there's a specific page there that features random cyclists that I meet in the street, and who happen to cycle, which is awesome. And we do these questions. I think most of them we've already covered, but there's a couple ones that I think could potentially bring up interesting stories from somebody that's as involved with it as you are. So one of them is, has anything interesting happened to you when riding? Is there anything that's particularly very interesting that just happened to happen while you were cycling?
Can I use somebody else's story for this?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. I was talking to a woman in the industry. It was like a business meeting, and she's like, oh, yeah, I love Divvy. I got a date out of Divvy. And I was like, oh, tell me more. And she's like, yeah, this guy and I were biking, and we were both biking to the same station, and then it turned into a date. And I was like, oh, if I can facilitate more of those, I'm going to feel good about my life. But like, I don't know, it's just something, like, biking is something that's still quirky enough in the US that, like, if you share it, right, like, it brings you together. So I think it was like biking is a little quirky, and then Divvy's like a little quirky within biking. And I just thought that was like such a great story to hear that.
Yeah, it was featured somewhere, or I think I've heard about it.
Yeah, and we had another couple that actually got engaged, and they were featured on WGN. He proposed while on a Divvy ride. It's a totally different couple, actually, completely different couple. He was like, we divvied all the time. We met on Bumble. Divvy was just part of all the dates that we did. He's like, yeah, she would want to go on a bike ride, so I'd show up all sweaty already, and then we'd have to go on another bike ride. And then he proposed on a Divvy ride.
So does that get them like a free membership? I think it should.
Yeah, it did. I give them both free I was like, wait,
pretty awesome.
You're not members. I was like, well, I could make more money from you if you just keep doing this.
Oh, they weren't members?
No, they weren't members. They just,
God, wow.
Did it casually. But we gave them free memberships for their wedding.
So what about favorite places to ride for you?
Yeah. I mean, the 606 is pretty great, but I think this is just outside of Chicago, and I equate it to the Florida Keys of the Midwest, which is the bike path that goes along Wolf Lake. So it's like if you're going to Indiana towards any of the breweries, and like you can't take a Divvy, so if you're thinking about taking a Divvy, don't do it. It's too far. But it's this bike path that's like elevated and through this lake, and it's super cool and weird. There's like the highway right next to it, but it feels like the Florida Keys. You've got water on both sides, and on a gorgeous day, it's just like super cool, and it's surreal to think that's just south of Chicago.
Oh, I didn't know this.
Wolf Lake. It's just, I mean, it's a bike path. You can bike to Indiana on bike paths, basically. So it's
I've been very close when I was trying to get to the Big Marsh, and I realized, oh wow, I'm just a few blocks north from Indiana. I was like, oh wow, that sounds it sounds good across state lines on your bike.
Yeah.
And the last one I think is a more interesting one, especially because I don't think you can bring Divvy into this one because it's already there. So what do you think, if anything, can improve bike infrastructure in Chicago? I mean, I think Divvy's already
curb redesign. What is the most, there's two annoying things. Lyfts, Ubers, parking in the bike lane because they have someone to pick up, right?
Right.
My boyfriend does this. He's like, I just have to like wait for somebody, and he's parking in the bike lane. I'm just, oh no, get out of the bike lane. But where are they going to go? He's like, what am I going to go 3 blocks? Like I'm realistic too, right? I've been in a Lyft where they drop me off in a bike lane. So what does that actually look like? It means get rid of parking spots, turn them into loading zones, turn them into curbside loading zones so that Lyfts and Ubers do not have to sit in the bike lane, because we've done a great job with bike path or like street, like lanes for the most part. Get cars out of bike lanes, create curb loading zones.
So you don't think kind of drivers are going to get there in terms of realizing that?
So you can think about Apple. Apple could create a massive user manual and be like, well, that's how you use our machines. Figure it out. Or they design a product so perfect that just your normal human behavior, your intuition just works, right? Do I think we should try to educate all these drivers to like change their behaviors? I mean, I think greater driver education is part of it, but like, let's make it easy on them. Let's make it easy on us. Let's give up parking spots that serve 2 people over the course of a day, get rid of them to serve 50 people, plus all the people that don't have to worry about cars in their bike lanes. Mic drop.
No, yeah, that sounds pretty interesting. I think I hadn't thought about that, but you're right. It's a part of everyday riding to go around somebody that's in the bike lane.
Yep.
And they absolutely don't realize. And even I've heard stories of people kind of just telling them and people getting angry about it. It's like, well, yeah, it's not intuitive. I think making it more intuitive is definitely the way to go. And yeah, is there anything you want to bring up that you might have not thought we brought during this?
I don't know. I mean, this was super fun. And I think this is what cycling is about, right? Like, you just meet so many great people, like your lives intersect in ways you don't expect. So from a personal level, like, this is what biking is. This is why I love it. This is why I'm fortunate to have found it. Thank you, Jordan, who introduced me to it. I tell you, I thank that guy all the time. So I don't know. This has just been super fun. When it comes to Divvy, we've got new pricing. More cool stuff will be coming if I have anything to say about it. So stay tuned. By the time this is posted, we'll probably have cool new news too. And I'm just like, bike share will continue to grow, and we'll see more and more bikes, and I'm super excited about that. And I think we can all celebrate that, whether it's cool hardcore cyclists or like just people on their bike for the first time. So like, be welcoming to all those people.
Yeah, I'm sure you guys are gonna have to get ready for that competition coming in at
some point. That's another episode.
But yeah, no, I think as personally, I also I'm a great advocate of Divvy. I think it's a great avenue to bike everywhere and not worry about using your own personal bike. And yeah, I really appreciate you taking the time
Yeah,
to,
thank you. I'm
to
bummed
talk
that
with
you're
the
headed out.
Cyclists Chicago. Yeah, and yeah, we'll see if I can implement this in San Diego
Yeah,
and
no,
see what the
there's
cycling
plenty
is
of
over
bike share
there.
in San Diego, so you can pick it up there, and yeah, good luck with the podcast there.
Awesome.
I mean, this is transferable anywhere, so
Right.
Yeah.
No, and we've learned today that you can pretty much
Yeah.
sell a transferable skill
Yeah.
to any degree. No, that was awesome. I really appreciate the time, Kelly,
Cool.
and thanks a lot. Let's wrap it up right now.
Cool.
Awesome.